Welcome back friends to another lecture of fluid mechanics and rate processes. So we are doing flow analysis. And in the last class we looked at the equations of motion in a differential form. So the first equation that we looked at is the continuity equation, and that was divergence of V equal to 0 for an incompressible flow where V is the velocity field. Then we looked at the momentum equation, and that equation was rho dV dt plus gradient of P, that's mu times Laplacian of V plus a body force. So what are the assumptions in these equations? Of course, the first assumption that we have made is that we can treat the fluid as a continuum. So these equations are valid only if we make that assumption. The second is we have assumed the fluid to be incompressible, which actually implies that d rho dt is 0. So I would like to remind you that incompressibility does not mean that the density is constant everywhere. Rather, it means that if there is a fluid element which has a certain density at an initial time, then it maintains that density for later times. But in general, I could have different fluid elements having different fluid density. So that's incompressibility. And we have assumed that we are dealing with a Newtonian fluid. So this allows us a linear relationship between the stress and the strain rate, which is the constitutive model for the framework that we are developing. If we had a fluid that was a little bit more complicated, that means it would be a non-Newtonian fluid, then these equations would look a little bit more complicated. So that's the set of equations, and we saw in the last class that they form a closed system of equations. In the sense that we counted that in 3 dimensions. So if I have 3 dimensions, I have my unknowns as P and Vx, Vy and Vz as the 3 components of velocity. So I have 4 unknowns. And likewise, I have 4 equations. There is one scalar equation for continuity, and this is a vector equation for velocity, and it actually corresponds to 3 scalar equations. So that makes it 4 equations. So 4 unknowns, 4 equations, and we have a closed system. But we are going to need initial conditions plus boundary conditions. And only then, once we have these conditions, we can solve these equations together with these boundary conditions. So we will have a discussion on that a little later. But first I want to point out a few properties or a few attributes of this system of equations. This term here, as you are aware, arises because of the material rate of change of velocity. So it's the acceleration of a fluid element. We often call this as the inertial term. It is related to the inertia of a fluid element. This here is a pressure gradient term. Let me remind you that we had the inertial term, this was equal to the net force acting on a certain fluid element. That we split into two parts, a body force and a surface force. So this one is because of the body force, and then the surface force we split it into two parts. For a Newtonian fluid, we said it is the stress is related to pressure, and then also the symmetric part of the gradient of the velocity field, which actually comes up as the viscous term. Okay. So what we are able to see is that the momentum equation is a fine balance between these four processes in play. So if you look at the dynamics of a fluid element, we are talking about inertia, we are talking about pressure forces, we are talking about body forces, and we are talking about viscous forces. So these four forces are in play, and their balance leads to this equation over here. Okay. The mass balance is an additional constraint on top of this momentum equation. Okay. Now what can happen is, in a certain scenario, because these are very general equations, maybe some of these terms are not important. Okay. So in the most general case, all these terms are important. But I could have a situation where, for example, I do not have a body force, I may want to, or it is very small, so I want to neglect the effect of gravity. So this term drops out, and then only these three terms remain. Or I may have a flow where maybe my inertia is not important. Okay. So the acceleration of the fluid elements is far, the force because of that is far exceeded by maybe the pressure gradient and the viscous term, and maybe then there are no body forces either. So I could have a situation where this term balances just the viscous term, and so on and so forth. So even though we have this complete equation over here with four forces that interact with each other, in principle, for a special situation, we may have a balance between just two of them, any two of them, or three of them, or of course all four of them. All right. A few observations that I wish to make. The first one is that the inertia term is nonlinear. Why is that? Now please recall that this term dv dt is actually, if you remember, this is the substantial acceleration. So it is given by the local acceleration plus v dot gradient of v, right. So this is the total acceleration, this is the local acceleration, and this is the convective acceleration, and this is a nonlinear term. In the sense that if I incremented v, if I took two v's, v1 and v2, and I simply added them together, then superposition does not hold as far as the material acceleration is concerned. So that contributes to nonlinearity. Effectively, it means that these equations, the flow equations, are nonlinear. Okay. So the nonlinearity is not arising because of any other aspect, it is essentially arising out of this term over here, which is the acceleration term. So that is one. The second aspect of this equation that I wish to draw your attention to is, let us look at the highest order derivative. So that is a first order derivative. You notice here, this is first order in time, and of course first order in space for velocity. What about the pressure gradient? Again first order in space. This is the viscous term, and you see there is a second order derivative here. and of course this doesn't have a derivative. So the viscous terms involve second order derivatives. Rather, I could say the viscous terms are the highest order terms. In fact, if I was to look at this interplay and I was able to get rid of the viscous forces, then I would get a reduction in my order of differential equation, and as you would see that mathematically it would be a little bit easier to solve. So second order equations are obviously a little bit more difficult to solve than first order equations. Not just that, they also need more boundary conditions, right. So if I had a second order equation versus a first order, I would need to supply more number of boundary conditions for the second order equation. Okay. The third observation is about the pressure. Okay. So absolute value of P is not important. What matters is the gradient of P. Okay. So I could take a pressure field. So P plus C has same effect as P in equations, right. So if I change the base pressure somewhere, okay, it doesn't really change the equations as such. Okay, they may change the boundary conditions as we will see, but you know they make no difference to this equation. This equation only looks at gradient of pressure. Okay, so that's an important observation. What you will also notice is that P here is not a thermodynamic pressure. It is a mechanical pressure. What I mean by that is, recall, if you had a gas, then we talk about P is related to rho R T. So pressure is related to changes in pressure are related to change in density and change in temperature. Not here, okay. As you will see that in these governing equations, temperature is not directly involved. Okay. Density is something that is given to you and it is not going to change for a fluid element. So it is an incompressible flow. So if I look at a particular fluid element, rho does not change as the element moves somewhere in the domain with time. T is not being tracked. So therefore P is kind of independent of the density and temperature. Okay. So in that sense it is a mechanical pressure and not a thermodynamic pressure. On the other hand, if I chose a compressible flow, then of course things would be different. Then we would get back pressure as a thermodynamic pressure. Okay. I would now like to expand these equations and then show you what they really look like. So let us take these equations and see how they look in 3 dimensions. So equations in 3 dimensions. So I am going to say that my velocity field is given as V is got these components Vx, Vy and Vz. My first equation is the continuity equation. So that's the divergence of V equal to 0, and I can now expand this, and that equation becomes del Vx by del x plus del Vy by del y plus del Vz by del z equal to 0. Okay, I am first doing this in the Cartesian coordinates, and then I will show you how these equations look like in cylindrical coordinates. How about the x momentum equation? The x momentum equation, so I pick the first term from there, rho dv dt, and that term would look something like this. So rho and dv dt I can expand as del Vx by del t plus Vx del Vx by del x plus Vy del Vx by del y plus Vz del Vx by del z. So that's my term corresponding to dv dt. Then the pressure gradient term, so that would be del p del x, and this would be given as mu times the Laplacian of the Vx, so that would be del square Vx by del x square plus del square Vx by del y square plus del square Vx by del z square. And finally the body force, so I will squeeze that term over here, and that is rho Fx. Okay. So that is the x momentum equation in its full glory in the Cartesian coordinates. Okay. Likewise, I could write down the other equations, for example the y momentum equation and the z momentum equation. So let me do that for you, and I will erase this. So y momentum equation looks very similar. Let me fill up the various terms. So now I have rho del Vy by del t, and then the convection term, which would be Vx del Vy by del x plus Vy del Vy by del y plus Vz del Vy by del z. Then a pressure gradient in the y direction, and the next term would be the Laplacian of the y component of velocity, so that would be mu times del square Vy by del x square plus del square Vy del y square del square Vz by del Vy by del z square, and the body force, which is rho Fy. Okay. Likewise, I could write the z momentum equation just for completeness, and that would be rho. This term would be Vz and Vx del by del y Vz plus now the convection because of the y velocity, now the convection because of the z velocity, then I add to it the pressure gradient in the z direction, the Laplacian of the coefficient of viscosity times the Laplacian of the z component of velocity, and finally the body force. Okay. So these equations now represent these four equations, one continuity and three momenta equation. They represent the flow equations for incompressible flows. As I mentioned in the last class, the momentum equations are referred to as the Navier-Stokes equations. Okay. Very nice. What happens if I have an ideal fluid? An ideal fluid implies I have the coefficient of viscosity to be 0. This is also referred to as frictionless flow. And I can do that in these equations, and as you will notice, the continuity equation does not change, but then my viscous terms, I can drop them out. So for an ideal fluid, my equations are divergence of V is 0, and then the momentum equations reduce to rho dV dt plus gradient of P, this is rho f. So I am able to now get rid of the second order terms in the velocity field. These equations are referred to as Euler equations. And you will notice that they are first order in space and time, unlike the Navier-Stokes equations where you have the second order terms. So Euler equations are a little bit easier to solve than the Navier-Stokes equations, okay, in terms of the order, but you will notice that they are still nonlinear. And that's because this term, the substantial acceleration, that still stays, and that still has the convective term in it, which is nonlinear. Great. So let me recap for you what we have done. We have looked at the equations of motion for an incompressible flow, and then tried to see how we can simplify them if we had an ideal fluid where we did not have the viscous forces. Then the interplay would be only between the inertia, body forces, and pressure forces. So before I go further, I want to demonstrate these equations to you in cylindrical coordinates. Okay. So what we have done is Cartesian coordinates, and I want to see how to represent these in cylindrical coordinates. As you are aware, sometimes we use Cartesian coordinates, and at many other times as engineers or scientists we use cylindrical and spherical coordinates. So these equations are available in almost all handbooks, but I just wanted to give you a flavor. We will do that only for the cylindrical coordinates. So you are aware of the axis. So let me just draw the axis for you. So this is x, this is y, and this is your z axis. And I could take a point here. This could be a point, let's say, in the xy plane, and the coordinates of this point are xy, but I could draw a position vector. So this is r, and this angle here is theta. I could fix a coordinate system. So I could have a unit vector in the radial direction, which I will call ER, and in the tangential direction I have E theta. So ER is the unit normal in the radial direction, E theta is the unit normal in the theta direction. And now I could write my velocity as three components. So in the ER, in the E theta, and of course in the z direction, or maybe I should call it the k direction. Okay. So the component in the ER, I will refer to it as VR, and then there is a component in the theta direction, plus there is a Vz component in the k direction. Okay. So instead of giving as Cartesian velocities Vx, Vy and Vz, I can now decompose the same velocity vector in 3 different components as given here. Of course, pressure is a scalar, so pressure is also a function of r, theta and z. Okay. So the question is, these vector equations, how do they expand in the cylindrical coordinate system? We have already seen on the far side of the blackboard, which you saw earlier, the equations written in the Cartesian coordinate systems. We can take a look at them a little later and compare with cylindrical coordinates. Some preliminaries. So suppose I have a scalar. So phi is a scalar. How do I represent gradient of phi? So gradient of phi would be a vector. It would have 3 components in the ER, E theta and k direction, and that would be given as del phi by del r in the ER direction, and then I would have 1 by r del phi by del theta in the theta direction, and the Ez of course remains the same. So that's del phi by del z in the k direction. Okay, so that's how I would represent gradient of phi. If I had to represent a divergence, so suppose I had to represent divergence of v, then in the cylindrical coordinates this would be given as 1 over r del by del r of r Vr plus 1 by r del V theta by del theta plus del Vz by del z. Okay. So therefore, if you had to write the continuity equation, actually divergence of v equal to 0 would simply imply that the sum of these 3 quantities is 0, and you can see that there are some additional terms that come in because of your curvilinear coordinates. So I am not going to write the continuity equation, because you can just put divergence of v equal to 0 and that is the equation. An interesting aspect is the curl of velocity. So how would you compute the curl of a vector in the cylindrical coordinate system? And that would be given as ER. So in the Cartesian coordinate system, it was in terms of I, j and k, the unit vectors. Here I would do it like this. So 1 by r ER E theta and 1 over r the z vector. Maybe I should write k. And then here I would have del by del r, del by del theta, del by del z, and I would put the components here as Vr, V theta and Vz. So by evaluating this determinant, you could get the vector value of the curl of velocity. So it's a little bit different than how you would evaluate it in the Cartesian coordinate systems, but you must keep this in mind, because sometimes if you have to solve the equations in a geometry which is more amenable to cylindrical coordinates, then this would be the right way of analyzing the flow. How about the Laplacian? The Laplacian of a quantity phi is given as 1 over r del by del r of r del phi by del r plus 1 by r square del square phi by del theta square plus del square phi by del z square. Again, there are some differences with respect to the cylindrical coordinates, with respect to the Cartesian coordinates. Likewise, if I had to look at a quantity like d phi by dt, where phi is a scalar, then that would be given as del phi by del t plus Vr del phi by del r plus V theta by r del phi by del theta plus Vz del phi by del z. Okay. Let me now write down the Navier-Stokes equations for you in the cylindrical coordinates. So this is going to be a little bit messy, but I just want you to get used to them. So first the R equation. So I would have to first write down the term which is actually this rho dv dt. So let me do that here. So rho dv dt would be given as del Vr by del t plus Vr del Vr by del r plus V theta by r del Vr by del theta minus V theta square by r plus Vz times del Vr by del z. So that's the dv dt term in the r direction. This plus the pressure gradient term, and now this has to be equated to the viscous term. So that would be mu times first the r derivative, the radial derivative, so 1 by r del by del r of r Vr, and then 1 by r square del square Vr by del theta square minus 2 by r square del V theta by del theta plus the final term for V square r by del z square, this times rho, the body force in the radial direction. So this is the r momentum equation, and you will notice it's far more complicated than the equation that we have here in the Cartesian coordinate system. Let me also squeeze in here the equation in the theta direction, and that would be given as rho, now this time del V theta by del t plus Vr del V theta by del r plus V theta by r del V theta by del theta plus Vr V theta by r plus Vz del V theta by del z. Okay, so that's the dv dt term for the theta direction plus a pressure gradient term del p by del theta, but then there has to be a 1 by r prior to it. So remember this, and this now is equal to the second order terms, which are again the del by del r, 1 by r, del by del r, r v r, sorry, this would be theta. This would be theta, r v theta, because we are worrying about the theta direction, plus 1 by r square del square v theta by del theta square plus 2 by r square del v r by del theta plus del square v theta by del z square. So that's the viscous term, and now we need to add to it a term that corresponds to the body force. So rho times F in the theta direction. I need to write only one more equation. So that would be in the z direction. So now the z equation. So that would be rho del Vz by del t plus Vr del Vz by del r. You will notice that in all these equations, if you learn the basic template, then really it's a matter of simply substituting Vr for the first equation, V theta for the second, and Vz for the third equation. In Cartesian it's very simple, and in cylindrical you will have some additional terms. So the key thing is not to miss out those terms. So you need to practice writing these equations and getting used to them. So this one would be V theta by r del Vz by del theta plus Vz del Vz by del z. So that's the dV dt term for the z momentum equation. Add to it the pressure gradient in the z direction, and now this has to be balanced by the viscous term, which again has a Laplacian. Okay. And then the 1 over r square, similar to a term like this, del square Vz by del theta square and del square Vz by del square, plus add to it rho Fz. Okay. All right. So so let me summarize what we have done. So we had these equations which represent the flow in a general three-dimensional domain, the continuity equation and the momentum equation, and I showed them to you how they can be expanded in the Cartesian coordinates, and then we also saw how to write them in the cylindrical coordinates. Alright, so we have looked at the equations, and I already alluded to the fact that we will need boundary conditions. So let us talk about the boundary conditions. They are of many kinds. Let us first talk about the far field. So let us look at an example of an aircraft. So here is an aircraft, and let me think of a coordinate system attached to the aircraft. So this is x, this is y, and the aircraft is moving at a certain speed. Let me call this as v. What does the aircraft do to the atmosphere? Well, it disturbs the air. So you can imagine that fluid particles that are very close to the aircraft, they get disturbed a lot. In fact, some of them will move at the same speed as the aircraft itself. But then as I look at particles that are farther away from the aircraft, the effect on those is going to be lesser. So I can say that what is the velocity at points which are far away. So if I look at points which are really far away from the aircraft, then I expect that this velocity should approach 0. And this I can argue even from the energy point of view. So here is the argument. The aircraft moves from right to left and causes some disturbance in the atmosphere. Where is that energy coming from? Obviously from the aircraft, because that's the one which is causing these particles to move. If it causes a finite amount of disturbance in the fluid particles that are at infinite, really far away, that means this aircraft must be putting infinite amount of energy to energize an infinite part of the atmosphere. Okay? And this aircraft obviously is not spending infinite amount of energy, it is spending a finite amount of energy. And from that argument we can say that the velocity far away because of this aircraft must tend to 0. The same is true for pressure. So P as x goes far away is going to be the P that would have been if the aircraft was not there, and therefore let me call this as P infinity, okay, which is the undisturbed pressure. Alternately, what I can do is I can think of a system where the observer is sitting on the aircraft and the aircraft is stationary and there is flow coming at the aircraft, and then these boundary conditions would translate to that. So if the aircraft is stationary and flow comes at it, then I would have a situation like this. So this is my aircraft and now the flow is coming at it at V, and the aircraft is stationary. Now the far field boundary conditions are that V at x tending to infinity is actually V infinity. Okay, but close to the aircraft the flow would be different than this V infinity. So if I call this as V infinity, and P at x tending to infinity is P infinity. So essentially what we are saying is that there is very little disturbance or no disturbance of an object to the flow which is far away. That is the far field. What about the solid surface? So I could imagine that there is a body, let us say I call it S is the surface of the body, and there is a unit normal to it, and V is the velocity of the fluid. Okay. I could also imagine that the solid itself is moving, so the velocity of the solid is Vs, and it could be in any arbitrary direction. So I could put a coordinate system here as x and y. So what should happen at the interface of the solid and the fluid? So mind you, this is the fluid and this is the solid. So specifically on this point, if this is an impervious surface, the fluid particles cannot enter the solid, and therefore I should be able to write the following, that normal to the solid surface the speed should be equal. So if my solid is traveling at a certain speed, that should be the speed of the fluid. Okay. So I could write the condition like this. So V dot n is equal to Vs, the solid surface, dot n. This is known as the no penetration condition. So if I have a solid surface, then the fluid cannot go inside it. Okay. A special case is Vs is 0. That means I have a stationary body. In that case, this condition boils down to V dot n is identically 0. So, if for the picture that I have drawn here, so this is a solid body and there is fluid coming at it, I could resolve it into two components. One is a component normal to the solid body and the other is in the plane of the solid body. So, the no penetration condition implies that I cannot have fluid going inside the body. Okay. Of course, one could have a very special case where I could have some holes here and then I could be trying to suck the flow in or blow it out, but those are special. If it is really a solid surface, then this is what the condition is. So, that is one. What about tangential speed? Now, people have done a lot of experiments and what they find is that in general fluid particles that are close to the solid surface, they move with the same speed as the speed of the solid surface. So, there is no proof of this, but this is largely from observations. Okay. So, tangential speed of fluid particles in contact with surface is identical to the speed of the surface, of course the tangential speed. That means they stick to the solid surface. This boundary condition is often referred to as no slip boundary condition. Okay. All right. So, what we are saying is that if I had a general velocity v, I could talk about two components. So, there is a normal component which is a solid surface and there is a tangential and what is being said is that this one is the no penetration and on this component you can talk about no slip. Okay. The reason this boundary condition usually holds is because of viscous effects. Okay. So, this is due to viscous effects. If I had a frictionless flow or an ideal fluid, that means it has no viscosity, then I would still have to respect this condition that my fluid cannot penetrate a solid surface. But as far as the tangential speed is concerned, now just like in solid mechanics, if I do not have friction, I can slip on a solid surface. Likewise, a fluid element can actually slip on this solid surface. So, no slip boundary condition does not hold for frictionless flow. Or for the Euler equations that I mentioned earlier in this lecture. So, we are going to stop here and we are going to continue with boundary conditions in the next class, and I would like to introduce you to in the next class to a system of two fluids. So, what happens if instead of a solid surface you had the interface between two fluids? Okay. That is a little bit more interesting and we will continue on that in the next class. Thank you.